Look, I need to tell someone about this whole mess because apparently everyone thinks I'm the crazy one here, but let me give you the real story about what happened with Martin and why our 5-year relationship just imploded over something that was supposed to be beautiful. I'm Elizabeth, I'm 28, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I was going to marry the love of my life. But now I'm sitting here wondering how a gesture of pure love turned into me being treated like some kind of psychopath. Martin lost his older brother Cameron in a motorcycle accident 3 years ago, and I've watched this man cry himself to sleep more nights than I can count. Cameron was his best friend, his hero, everything to him, and the grief just never seemed to get easier. Now here's the thing that nobody seems to understand. I only met Cameron a handful of times, because Martin and I got serious after Cameron had already moved across the country for work. But every single time Martin talked about him, his whole face would light up with this mix of love and pain that just broke my heart. I have step-siblings, but we're not close at all. So watching Martin have this incredible bond with his brother made me realize what I was missing. And I guess I became a little obsessed with the idea of that kind of connection. Between us, I started following Cameron on social media before he died, not in a creepy way, but just to understand what made him so special to Martin. And I'll admit I developed this weird admiration for him. He was everything Martin described and more. When Cameron died, I watched Martin fall apart completely, and I felt so helpless because nothing I did seemed to make it better. No matter how much I tried to be there for him, hold him, listen to him talk about memories, it was like I couldn't reach that part of his heart. I started researching grief, reading about how to support someone through loss, and everywhere I looked, it said that memorializing the person was important, that keeping their memory alive was healing. So I came up with what I thought was the most beautiful, meaningful gesture I could possibly make. I would get a tattoo of Cameron's face on my upper arm, a gorgeous realistic portrait with his nickname Cam underneath and his birth and death dates, with a little Snoopy, because Martin always talked about how Cameron collected Snoopy stuff. I spent weeks planning it, finding the perfect artist, choosing the best photo of Cameron from Martin's social media, and I was so excited because I knew this would show Martin exactly how much I understood his pain and how far I was willing to go to honor what mattered to him. The tattoo took 6 hours and cost me $800. But watching it come together was like watching something sacred being created. Cameron's face looked so real, so alive, and I kept thinking about how Martin would feel seeing his brother's memory permanently etched into my skin. I planned this whole reveal where I'd surprise Martin when he got home from work, maybe cook his favorite dinner, and then show him this incredible tribute I'd made to the most important person in his life. When I finally showed him, pulling up my sleeve with this huge smile on my face, I expected tears of gratitude. Maybe him being overwhelmed by the depth of my love and commitment to his healing. Instead, Martin just stared at my arm with this expression I'd never seen before, like he was looking at something horrifying, and the silence stretched on so long I started to panic. "Babe, it's Cameron," I said, like maybe he didn't recognize the artwork. "I had it done by the best portrait artist in the city. Look how real it looks." But Martin just kept staring, and when he finally looked up at me, there was something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Not gratitude, not love, but something that looked almost like fear. "Elizabeth, what? Why would you do this?" he asked, and his voice was so quiet, so strange, that I immediately went into defense mode because this was not the reaction I'd spent weeks imagining. I started explaining how much thought I'd put into it, how I wanted to honor Cameron's memory, how I knew how much Martin missed him, and I wanted to carry that love with me always. But the more I talked, the more distant Martin looked. "You barely knew him," he said finally, and those 4 words hit me like a slap, because how dare he minimize my connection to Cameron, my understanding of what he meant to our relationship, my right to grieve and memorialize someone who was so important to the man I loved. I felt this surge of anger because I'd just made this huge sacrifice, this permanent commitment to his family, to his pain. And instead of appreciating it, he was acting like I'd done something wrong. I knew him enough, I shot back. I knew him through you, through every story you told me, through every tear you cried, and I wanted to show you that your pain is my pain, that Cameron matters to me too. But Martin just shook his head and said it made him uncomfortable, that seeing Cameron's face on my body felt wrong somehow. And I couldn't believe he was being so ungrateful about something I'd done purely out of love. The whole conversation spiraled from there, with me trying to explain my intentions and Martin acting like I'd committed some kind of violation, and by the end of it, we were both upset and nothing was resolved. That night, lying in bed with Martin turned away from me, I stared at Cameron's face on my arm and wondered how something so beautiful, so meaningful, could have gone so wrong. But I was still convinced that Martin just needed time to process what an incredible gesture this really was. The next morning, Martin was acting all weird and distant, making his coffee without offering to make me any like he usually did. And when I tried to bring up the tattoo again, he just said he needed time to think about it. Time to think about what? I'd permanently marked my body with his brother's face, and he needed to think about whether that was okay? I started wearing long sleeves to work because I could tell the tattoo was bothering him, even though it killed me to hide something so beautiful and meaningful. But here's what really got to me. Martin started questioning everything about my relationship with Cameron, like suddenly he was suspicious of every interaction I'd ever had with his brother. "How did you even get that photo of him?" he asked one evening, and I explained that I'd saved it from his Facebook page because it was such a good picture. But he looked at me like I was some kind of stalker. Look. I'll admit I might have been a little more interested in Cameron than Martin realized, but that was just because I loved Martin so much and wanted to understand every part of his life. I started noticing things about Martin's behavior that I'd never paid attention to before. How he'd get this weird look on his face when he saw the tattoo peeking out from under my sleeve. How he'd turn away when I was changing clothes. How he started making excuses to avoid being intimate. It was like he couldn't separate me from his grief anymore, and instead of seeing the tattoo as a beautiful tribute, he was treating it like some kind of curse. I tried to explain to him that this was supposed to bring us closer together, that now we both carried Cameron with us. But Martin just kept saying it felt wrong, and he couldn't explain why. His mother, Willow, wasn't any help either. When I showed her the tattoo, hoping she'd appreciate the gesture and maybe talk some sense into Martin, she just got this uncomfortable look and said it was very detailed. Very detailed? That's all she had to say about the fact that I'd permanently marked my body to honor her dead son? The whole family was acting like I'd done something inappropriate instead of something beautiful, and I was getting more frustrated by the day. Martin started sleeping on the couch some nights, claiming he just couldn't fall asleep, but I knew it was because he couldn't handle looking at Cameron's face on my arm. I suggested we go to couples therapy to work through his feelings about the tattoo, but he said he didn't think therapy could fix this particular problem. What was that supposed to mean? I was trying everything I could think of to help him process his emotions, but he was acting like I was the problem, instead of grief being the problem. The truth is, I started to resent Martin for not appreciating what I'd done, for making me feel like a freak when I was just trying to love him the best way I knew how. I'd given him everything. 5 years of my life, $800, 6 hours of pain getting that tattoo, and a permanent commitment to his family's memory. And he was treating me like I'd betrayed him somehow. Things came to a head about 2 weeks after I got the tattoo, when Martin asked me to consider getting it covered up or removed. I was so shocked I couldn't even respond at first. He wanted me to erase this beautiful tribute, this symbol of how much I loved him, just because it made him uncomfortable. "Elizabeth, I appreciate what you were trying to do," he said, using that careful tone he'd been using with me lately. "But seeing Cameron's face on your body every day is really hard for me to handle." Hard for him to handle? What about how hard it was for me to watch him grieve for 3 years, to feel helpless every time he broke down crying, to know that there was this huge part of his heart that I could never touch or heal? I'd found a way to bridge that gap, to become part of his connection with Cameron, and he wanted me to just erase it, because it made him uncomfortable. I'm not covering it up, I told him firmly. This tattoo is permanent, just like my love for you and my respect for Cameron's memory. But Martin kept pushing, saying maybe I could get a cover-up tattoo that was less realistic. Or maybe I could start the laser removal process. And with every suggestion, I got angrier, because he clearly didn't understand what this meant to me. The tattoo wasn't just about Cameron. It was about proving to Martin that I was willing to do anything for him. That I understood his pain better than anyone else ever could. That I was committed to his healing in ways that went beyond what any normal girlfriend would do. But instead of seeing that, he was focused on his own discomfort. His own weird hang-ups about seeing his brother's face on my body. I started wearing tank tops around the house just to force him to look at it, to confront what I'd done for him, instead of hiding from it, like a coward. The more he avoided looking at the tattoo, the more I made sure he couldn't avoid it, because I wasn't going to let him pretend this beautiful gesture didn't exist. I could tell it was bothering him, the way his jaw would tighten when he caught sight of Cameron's face on my arm. But I figured he needed to work through his issues instead of expecting me to change. The whole situation exploded one night when I was getting ready for bed and Martin made some comment about how he wished I'd talked to him before getting the tattoo. It wouldn't have been a surprise then, I snapped. And besides, you would have talked me out of it because you're too scared to really honor Cameron's memory. That hit him wrong. And he started going off about how I didn't understand his grief, how the tattoo felt like a violation of something sacred between him and his brother, how seeing Cameron's face on my body made him feel sick. Made him feel sick? Here I was, carrying his brother's image with me everywhere I went, making Cameron a permanent part of my identity, and Martin felt sick about it? I told him he was being selfish and ungrateful, that most men would be touched by such a meaningful gesture. But he just kept shaking his head like I was the one being unreasonable. You got a tattoo of my dead brother without asking me, he said. How's that not crazy? Crazy? I was crazy for loving him enough to permanently alter my body in tribute to the most important person in his life. I was crazy for trying to help him heal, for wanting to carry his pain with him, for making the ultimate gesture of commitment to his family. The fight escalated from there, with Martin saying things like the tattoo was inappropriate and disturbing, and me trying to make him understand that this was love in its purest form. I brought up every sacrifice I'd made for him over 5 years, every time I'd held him while he cried, every anniversary of Cameron's death that I'd helped him get through, and I asked him how he could question my motives when I'd proven my love in the most permanent way possible. But Martin wasn't hearing any of it. He was stuck on this idea that I'd crossed some kind of boundary, that getting a tattoo of Cameron was somehow wrong, and nothing I said could make him see reason. By the end of that fight, we were both exhausted and angry, and Martin said he needed space to think about our relationship. Space to think about our relationship? Because I'd gotten a tattoo? I couldn't believe he was willing to throw away 5 years over something so stupid, but I could see in his eyes that he was serious. That night, he slept in the guest room, and I lay in bed staring at Cameron's face on my arm, wondering how something so beautiful had turned into such a nightmare. The next few days were tense as hell, with Martin barely talking to me, and me trying to act like everything was normal while seething inside about his reaction. I made his favorite dinner one night, thinking maybe if I reminded him how good we were together, he'd stop being such a baby about the tattoo. But when I went to hand him his plate, something went wrong, and the hot spaghetti ended up all over me instead of in his hands. The sauce was scalding, and it soaked through my shirt, and I immediately started screaming because it hurt like hell and made a huge mess on our couch. But instead of being sympathetic, Martin started acting like I was overreacting, trying to help me clean up while I was in pain and furious about the whole situation. "You did that on purpose," I yelled, because honestly it felt like he'd been looking for ways to punish me ever since I got the tattoo. And dropping hot food on me seemed like exactly the kind of passive-aggressive thing he'd do. Martin started protesting that it was an accident, that he'd never hurt me on purpose. But I was already beyond listening to his excuses. Here I was, burned and covered in tomato sauce, and he was more concerned about defending himself than taking care of me. I was so angry about everything. The tattoo situation, his ungrateful attitude, the way he'd been treating me like a pariah for weeks, that I just lost it completely. I started throwing whatever was within reach, plates and glasses and anything I could get my hands on, because I needed him to understand how frustrated and hurt I was. The kitchen cabinet door had been loose for months, and when I grabbed it to steady myself, it came right off in my hands. So I threw that too, because why not? Everything was falling apart anyway. Martin was ducking and trying to get me to calm down, but I was past the point of calm. I was tired of being treated like the bad guy when all I'd done was love him too much. "This is what you've turned me into," I screamed, gesturing at the mess I'd made. "I never used to be like this, but you've made me crazy with your ungrateful attitude." The whole fight probably lasted 10 minutes. But by the end of it, our kitchen looked like a war zone, and Martin was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. That's when he said it, that he couldn't be with me anymore, that this was the last straw, and he was leaving. Just like that, 5 years down the drain, because he couldn't handle a little emotional outburst after weeks of his passive-aggressive bullshit. Martin left that night with a bag of clothes, and I haven't seen him since, except when he came back with his friend Nathan to get the rest of his stuff. I didn't answer any of his calls or texts because what was the point? He'd made his decision, chosen his weird hang-ups over our relationship, and I wasn't about to beg someone who couldn't appreciate what I'd done for him. The apartment felt empty without him, and every time I looked at Cameron's face on my arm, I felt this mix of sadness and anger. Sadness because I'd lost the man I loved, anger because he'd been too selfish to see what the tattoo really meant. I started telling people that Martin had left me over a tattoo, and you should have seen their faces. Everyone agreed that he was being ridiculous, that most women wouldn't go to such lengths to honor their partner's family, that he was an idiot for throwing away a good thing. My coworker Melanie said she wished her boyfriend cared enough about her family to get a tattoo, and my friend Vanessa said Martin was probably just looking for an excuse to leave and use the tattoo as his out. That made sense to me. Maybe he'd been having doubts about our relationship for a while, and was too much of a coward to admit it, so he seized on the tattoo thing as his escape route. I mean, what kind of man leaves a woman who loves him enough to permanently alter her body for his sake? Dean from my work said Martin sounded like he had issues with commitment and intimacy, that the tattoo probably scared him because it represented how serious I was about our relationship. The more I talked to people, the more I realized that Martin was the one with the problem, not me. I'd made a grand romantic gesture, and he'd turned it into some kind of psychological drama because he couldn't handle being loved that intensely. It's been 4 months now since Martin left, and I still can't believe he threw away 5 years over something so stupid. I've heard through mutual friends that he's doing fine, apparently working on himself, whatever that means, but I haven't seen him around town or anything. The tattoo still looks amazing. Cameron's face is as detailed and beautiful as the day I got it, and I've actually gotten a lot of compliments on the artwork from strangers who don't know the whole story. I've been on a few dates, and when guys ask about the tattoo, I tell them it's a memorial for someone important to me, which is true enough. Most of them think it's sweet that I'd honor someone's memory that way, which just proves that normal people understand what Martin couldn't. I'm not covering it up, and I'm definitely not getting it removed. This tattoo cost me $800 and 6 hours of pain, plus it's genuinely beautiful artwork that I'm proud to wear. If Martin couldn't handle being with someone who loved him enough to permanently mark her body in tribute to his family, then he didn't deserve me in the first place. Look, I'll admit that maybe I should have mentioned the tattoo idea to him beforehand, but the surprise was part of what made it special. And if he'd really loved me, he would have been touched by the gesture instead of freaked out by it. I gave that man everything I had for 5 years. And when I made the ultimate romantic gesture, he turned it into some kind of horror story because he's emotionally stunted. Between us, I think Martin was looking for a reason to leave anyway, and the tattoo just gave him the excuse he needed to run away from real commitment. The truth is, I'm better off without someone who can't appreciate true love when it's staring him in the face, literally. I mean, I carry his brother's memory with me everywhere I go, and instead of being grateful, he acted like I was some kind of stalker. His loss, really, because not every woman would go to such lengths to show her devotion, and whoever he ends up with next definitely won't love him as much as I did. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about what he gave up, if he ever regrets walking away from someone who cared about his family as much as I did. But mostly I just feel sorry for him, because he'll probably never find another woman willing to make such a permanent commitment to his happiness.